The relationship between the United States and Israel is one of the most important in terms of global politics in the world today. The United States has been Israel's strongest ally for decades. It gives billions of dollars every year to support the Israeli military. America's support was also key in winning the Six-Day War in the 1960s and taking over what became known as the occupied territories. Some people believe Jewish lobby groups are responsible for much of this and that they're far too powerful in terms of congressional elections and in determining US foreign policy. Today, we take an in-depth look at the historic relationship between these two countries and show why the US always supports Israel, despite the appalling aggression and abuse of human rights by that country in recent times. Here in this video clip to start with, we show Joe Biden about 40 years ago explaining the need for a US ally in the Middle East.
We look at the Middle East. I think it's about time we stop, those of us who support, as most of us do, Israel in this body, for apologizing for our support for Israel. There's no apology to be made. None. It is the best $3 billion investment we make. Were there not an Israel, the United States of America would have to invent an Israel to protect her interest in the region. The United States would have to go out and invent an Israel.
So as Joe Biden has just said there, America has a desperate need for a strong ally in the Middle East in order to protect American interests there. This is also a very important region of the world in terms of producing half the world's oil supply. So American foreign policy is to maintain a balance of power between the various regional powers there. Otherwise, this role would be fulfilled by the Soviet Union in the past, or today by China and Russia. Here, Richard Nixon explains this situation.
Their belief is that being for Israel first means that that does not mean you're putting America second, because they think it goes together. An American president, however, has to approach it in a different way, in my opinion. He's got always to think first of what is best for America. Usually, what is best for America is also best for Israel and vice versa. On occasions, an American president must make a decision that does not, in effect, give the Israelis a blank check. And one example of that is a decision that I made. I decided early on in our administration that we were going to seek good relations with Egypt and others of Israel's neighbors. Many of my Israeli friends didn't like that because they wanted a special relationship with Israel and Israel only. But I have always said Israel's interests are better served to have the United States a friend of Israel's neighbors and potential enemies than to leave a vacuum which the Soviet Union would fill. I still believe that, and I think that should be American policy today.
So the relationship between the States and Israel has very deep roots indeed. In fact, it goes right back to the foundation of the Israeli state in 1948. Britain had promised the Jewish people a homeland for their support during the First World War. However, they were too weak basically to fulfill that promise in the aftermath of the Second World War, and the US replaced them as a major global power. America became, in fact, one of the first countries to recognize Israel as a state and quickly developed a strong military relationship with it. So right from the beginning, Israel found themselves in a very difficult position. They were supported by powerful countries such as Britain, France, and America, but surrounded by hostile Arab nations who planned to wipe them off the map. Tensions grew throughout the 1950s and 60s, with Israel being bombed and attacked repeatedly by its neighbours. Egypt moved its army close to the Israeli border and threatened to cut off its shipping supplies. Israel reacted in what became known as the Six-Day War. In a single week, Israel tripled its size by taking over what later became known as the occupied territories. They took the Sinai Peninsula and Gaza from Egypt. They captured the West Bank from Jordan and took the Golan Heights from Syria. All this was achieved mainly with the use of American military support and technology. From that point onwards, the US and Israel became very close allies than ever before, and the states actually became deeply involved in several attempts at peace deals ever since. In 1978, Jimmy Carter, as president, was involved in a major peace process. Here, Israel returned the Sinai Peninsula to Egypt in return for Egypt's recognition of Israel's right to exist as a state. The Egyptian leader, however, President Sadat, betrayed the people of Gaza by signing this deal, and he was assassinated a couple of years later by an Arab extremist in 1981. And so the people of Gaza, the Gaza Strip, were left behind as Egypt retrieved the rest of their territory, the most important part, the Sinai Peninsula, from Israel. A small area in the north, also known as the Golan Heights, was taken from Syria. This was never returned. In fact, this was recognized as part of Israel by Donald Trump in 2019. The West Bank, which is quite a big area, was originally part of Jordan, and it is still held illegally by Israel according to international law. In the 1990s, President Bill Clinton tried to reach agreement on a two-state solution between the Israeli Prime Minister and the PLO leader Yasser Arafat. There was actually a statement of mutual recognition. The PLO recognized Israel's right to exist as a state, and the Prime Minister recognized Arafat as the leader of the Palestinian people. However, these talks failed also. They failed to achieve their ultimate objective, mainly because of a lack of trust on both sides and endless disputes over borders. Other issues, such as the position of Jerusalem, proved crucial, and how Palestinian refugees would be treated. There was also argument over the Israeli settlement in the West Bank and other issues of a very emotive nature. And so over the years, there's been various attempts at trying to solve the Israeli-Palestinian problem, but all have unfortunately failed over a 30-year period at this stage. President Donald Trump actually signed the Abraham Accords in 2020. They made Israel's position much more secure in that the normalized relationships between Israel and several other Arab countries. This actually broke with long-standing Arab policy of not recognizing Israel until the Palestinian issue had been settled. And so these developments have left Palestinians in a desperate situation. The attack by Hamas on the 7th of October 2023 was a desperate attempt to stop the normalization talks and the process that was going on between Israel and Saudi Arabia. In that attack on 7th of October, 1,200 Israelis were killed. This was the worst week in their history. However, many people consider the reaction by the Israelis to have been extremely over the top. 58,000 Palestinians have been killed so far, 130,000 Palestinians injured, and hundreds of thousands more displaced. Here is a situation where America actually supports Israel but cannot really control them. Israel knows America needs them as an ally in the Middle East. The threat of the Soviet Union is gone, but it has been replaced largely by Russia and China. So the US still needs Israel in the Middle East as an ally, a very important ally. But it can often be a strained and difficult relationship, as Bill Clinton here explains.
Mr. Netanyahu has long wanted to fight Iran because that way he can stay in office forever and ever. I mean, he's been there most of the last 20 years. But I think we should be trying to diffuse it. And I hope President Trump will do that. I hope anybody there will do that. We've got to stop. We've got to convince our friends in the Middle East that we'll stand with them and try to protect them. But choosing undeclared wars in which the primary victims are civilians who are not politically involved one way or the other, just want to live decent lives, is not a very good solution.
And so this video was an attempt to explain the never-ending aspect of global politics, namely the relationship between the US and Israel. The Jewish lobby groups in the States, of course, are important, and they're very influential indeed, but there's no doubt about that. But many congressmen and women are terrified by them, terrified of losing their seats if they go against them. However, there's also other reasons for the US to support Israel, and Americans need the need for a strong ally in the Middle East being the most important one. However, the US is also a very Christian country in many ways, and it sees itself and its foundations of Christianity as being very closely connected to the Jewish religion and the Old Testament and all that. And the US and Israel have very close shared values such as is democracy, free speech, free press, and independent judiciary, and all that type of thing. So none of these other countries, like none of these Arab countries like China or Russia, share this value system. And so for these very many reasons, this partnership between the US and Israel is likely to continue for decades to come. And here, finally, we have Donald Trump, the existing president, explaining his frustration at his failure to get a peace situation developed between Israel and Iran.
That Iran violated the peace agreement and the ceasefire agreement. Do you believe that Iran is still committed to peace?
Yeah, I do. They violated it, but Israel violated it too.
Are you questioning if Israel is committed?
Israel, as soon as we made the deal, they came out and they dropped a load of bombs, the likes of which I've never seen before. The biggest load that we've seen. I'm not happy with Israel. You know, when I say, okay, now you have 12 hours, you don't go out in the first hour and just drop everything you have on them. So I'm not happy with them. I'm not happy with Iran either. But I'm really unhappy if Israel's going out this morning because of one rocket that didn't land, that was shot, perhaps by mistake, that didn't land. I'm not happy about that. You know what? We basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the they're doing. Do you understand that?
So that's it for today. Thank you very much for watching. Please subscribe to the channel. It's free to do so. And goodbye.